Welcome to the DevReady Podcast. Joining me on the DevReady Podcast today, I have Dr. Grace Ng. For those of you that are new here, I haven't actually met Grace before, learning all about her today the first time, along with yourselves. So, Grace, I'll let you take it away.
So thanks, Anthony, and thanks so much for having me on this podcast. I really have enjoyed the content, and I thought that was really helpful for small business owners. Like myself now, especially now that I'm starting my new journey. So the last maybe 20 years, I've been in and out of business on corporate side. My first degree is an IT degree, and so I started as a market analyst for Asia Pacific. Went through a massive, I guess, journey watching the big tech companies as you'd see them now go through Web 1.0 to 2.0 and scale across Asia Pacific. Advisor to a number of them in the corporate, so back and forth from the US, and then started joining I joined one of my clients to help them consolidate their region. So we did that, grew it 25% year on year, built the Asia Pacific region as it was, and got burnt out. I was like, you know what? I'm not adding to society by doing this at all. So I became a medical doctor. So I trained at the University of Sydney. Really fell in love with the brain then, and pursued a career in neurosurgery where I went on to the training program, did 2 years of it, met my husband, realized that I wasn't training as well as him. He's gone on to be a neurosurgeon. So to be honest, one neurosurgeon in the family is more than enough, I would say, possibly too much. And I have pursued my love of brain through neurostimulation. So neurostimulation is a non-invasive technique in which you activate the brain's natural healing processes. It sounds so crystal therapies when I talk about it. Nothing wrong about crystal therapies, but this technology has actually been around for about 40 plus years. So we are still learning so much about the brain. We did not know that it had a lymphatic system like up until about 15 years ago. And so when I say activating healing properties of the brain, I'm expecting you in order to ask me all these questions about it. And, you know, what I'm going to talk about might be just the cutting edge of what we know, and it may completely be wrong in about 2 years' time. So
I know the brain as a concept is just people it changes constantly because there's new ways of understanding things, and it's not something that's easily studied either or understood.
Exactly.
I think even just the hemispheres or the sections of the brain that control different things, the concept of what we understand them to control changes from time to time.
100%. And, you know, it's a kind of organ where, especially when you start talking about areas like psychiatry, this is a discipline that doesn't actually look at the brain. Look, I'm not throwing shade on my psychiatric colleagues at all, but reality is that because we have subsegmented medicine so far, I mean, the only joke is that I'm an orthopedic surgeon for the left foot, not the right foot, that kind of thing, right? It's almost impossible in order to step back and actually look at that whole person because the data is then siloed, you know. And I'm going to speak across IT and medicine because obviously that appeals, that you and I can actually connect on that component of it. And because artificial intelligence is so exciting because I think it's going to go across those different silos. The other thing that's really exciting, and it's actually ironically or not, coming out of Stanford, there's a professor called Nolan Williams who's very influential in my thinking about the way of the brain. But he thinks that all psychiatric diseases, for example, are disorders of distributed neural networks. How cool is that, right? So that if you actually think about a neurological condition like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, it's actually like, how does that network function? I've just come back from a conference in Thailand, and it was called the Global Neurology and Brain Disorders Conference. And we were speaking about the results that we had. We used to have a clinic down in Melbourne. Now we've got one here on the Gold Coast. We're looking at opening again up in Melbourne. But our results were actually better than the global average. So, you know, that we presented on that and as to why. We thought about mental health as a brain disease. That is our philosophy at Brain Aid clinics. And it's so exciting to connect with, you know, thinkers like, you know, Professor Nolan Williams and, you know, some of the amazing guys coming out of Dusseldorf in Germany and Thailand, et cetera, that are also approaching it as, well, there's a cellular disease going on here, but there's also a network connectivity issue going on as well.
So you're focused more on sort of like the mental disorders I think I don't know if I said that right. That people
Yeah.
face and how the brain handles them, as opposed to more like the physical, which is the Alzheimer's and the other one where you forget things, where there's like a
Parkinson's.
build-up of Parkinson's, no, where they're like
Yes.
a
Yeah.
build-up of like I think a celluloid plaque on the brain, and that affects the pathways. If I've got
Yeah.
that
So if
correct,
you
I have a very
Yeah,
slight
I think you're
understanding of
right.
this.
So yeah, no. So if you see it as a neural network itself, the brain is a neural network itself. So you may have a problem with the internet connectivity or
Hmm.
the device to device connectivity, but the device itself may actually be problematic. So what they did when they applied, we have a TMS machine here in our clinic here. So it's
Oh
a
wow,
$250,000 beautiful machine. This is the machine that we actually produce those better than global average results, right? Um, and this machine, or this kind of machine, a TMS machine, was used probably about 7 years ago. And I spoke to one of the researchers um, on Alzheimer's patients. And what they found was that Alzheimer's patients really responded to it. They actually got better cognitive scores, improvement in activities of daily living, etc. But it wasn't sustained. And they theorized at the time that it was because the damage by the time they actually affect people with Alzheimer's is that the damage to the cell
it's
is
too late.
actually too much. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it improved the connectivity, but it didn't actually improve the cell. And so the stuff that I saw in Thailand was this technology called transcranial percussive stimulation. When you apply it to wounds on the skin, what it does is that there's might have this big, great fungating ulcer. Apologies to anyone who's having coffee at any time, but you might have this massive ulcer and it's not closing, for love or money or vacuum or or dressings or anything like that. And they would use this pulsatile kind of, and they'll shock. It's a shockwave, so it's like the sonic boom of a plane. There is
Hmm.
something about that signal because it looks almost cardiac in nature. It's that really sharp kind of peak and a downward trough, but it's not as deep as a downward trough, and then it kind of peters out. And what they found was that for ulcers that weren't closing, they'd start to granulate when you actually apply this TPS to them. So they thought, well, if we can apply it here, well, why can't we apply it to cells elsewhere in the body? So they did in cardiac, then they did in the brain. And what they're finding is that if you apply both, so TPS for the cellular regeneration
Hmm.
and TMS for the connectivity, then it is actually speaking to what Professor Williams is theorizing, which is that all of these psychiatric diseases, all these neurological conditions are actually disorders of this distributed neural network. So that it's the cell plus the connectivity, or it's the device plus the TCP, ICP connectivities that are actually the problem.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a physical issue then, not just
Yes,
a mental issue where it's change your mindset
ex-
and you'll improve, because you may not be able to because the pathways aren't working correctly and the cells are damaged.
exactly. The cardiac
Okay.
analogy is like if you've got cardiac disease, well, we're going to be looking at the heart.
Yeah.
If you have a mental disorder, then it's an expression of a diseased brain, then at least let's improve the brain health so you've got a fighting chance of actually improving
Yeah. Well,
your
the same.
mental
Yeah. If it's
health.
a physical condition, improve the body to then solve that problem. So
You got it.
one thing in the brain space is, if it is neural networks, is
Yeah.
there studies or does that assist in creating new pathways, not just repairing the existing pathways, so that way you can bypass the issue?
Oh my God.
Or
Do you
how
want a
good does
job?
that work?
You can see. Exactly it. Yes. So that process is called neurogenesis, and they showed that it grows new connections. It may not grow new cells, but it activates the stem cells in order to
Hmm.
form, I guess, a repair mechanism. So it improves the blood flow. So VEGF, they've been able to test certain factors inside the blood to actually increase. So all of it essentially goes through like a tissue cellular regeneration, just like you see a scab essentially healing on your skin.
Yep.
That's essentially happening, or that's what they're theorizing is happening from all the factors that they're seeing. Of course, as soon as you cut the brain, a little bit of a problem in terms of actually putting it all the pieces back
Yeah.
together. So
It's very hard to monitor and assess what it's actually doing. Even I think, as
100%.
far as I know, which is a drop in the ocean compared to your knowledge, that like an MRI won't even get you to that level. It just highlights active centers of the brain during that session while you're doing a certain task, which is activating the right area, and then whoever's assessing is just making an assumption saying, we've seen this area highlight in 10,000 people that when they're doing this task, that means
Yes.
now it's controlling that.
Yes, yes. And so that is the personalized aspect of medicine. So you can personalize it in a number of different ways. There's the personalization where you're essentially comparing it to 40,000 other people. You know, the people are building databases. There's a large database, for example, coming out of Arkansas that's being used. And they're looking at it in terms of brain injury and a whole bunch of other things. So it's like you versus what is essentially a statistically significant
Yep.
section of the population. Okay, fair enough, kind of thing. And then there's personalization that, like, well, that's probably the way we're going in terms of DNA analysis or unique to your particular brain function. We know that fMRI and MRI, so this machine, for example, does MRI navigated or fMRI navigated RTMS. We chose that because we think that's medico-legally and ethically correct, because not using it means that you only have an accuracy of 40%. I cannot imagine applying something
Okay.
with that level of accuracy to the brain. So we use
Yep.
an fMRI one that is like almost 90 to 99% accurate for its ability to target the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And then we also combine it with a DNA nutrition assessment. And we do that because there's been so much research actually led out of Australia. So Felice Jacka and the Food Mood Institute out of Deakin back in 2017 demonstrated SMILES trial that you can actually change mood by food alone. So pursuing a modified Mediterranean diet
Yep.
will actually improve your mood. So there's no point in me stimulating your brain and then you going and sitting in front of the couch, not sleeping, eating junk food, drinking Coca-Cola and
It's just
essentially
it's a
playing
waste.
Playboy for the next, it's just a waste,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So it's an uphill battle. Like eventually something will change, but wouldn't it be nice if we're all kind of like, rowing in the same direction? So we came up with Thought Movement and Food, which is a lifestyle modification program. And we think that that's the reason why our results are actually better than the global average. That we're actually making neuroplastic or encouraging a neuroplastic environment, neuroplasticity, the ability for neurons and neuronal cells to change, neurogenesis, where there is that formation and the activation of the stem cell factors, stem cells inside the brain itself, and then that rewiring that essentially occurs. So if we can improve the cellular quality and improve their ability to communicate with each other, we can actually walk back a number of the symptoms that patients are experiencing. And we've seen that definitely on the depression and anxiety scale.
Okay.
Can I tell you
So,
something really exciting though? We're
yeah.
seeing this in Alzheimer's as well. So
Oh,
so
wow.
mild cognitive impairment and brain fog. So like even if we think about brain fog, which has really come up into like the lexicon now after COVID. So from COVID induced brain fog going up to maybe mild cognitive impairment, moderate cognitive impairment, going to severe where, diagnosis of Alzheimer's or some form of dementia is imminent. We can actually see changes, not just with RTMS, but using other neurostimulation techniques like lifestyle modifications, like TPS.
Okay.
And that means that a diagnosis is no longer your fate. Your
Yep.
genes are no longer your fate. You can change the environment in which they're being expressed.
So
Isn't
what
that
you mentioned
cool?
before,
Like,
that's amazing.
yes,
And what you mentioned before, that covers the entire like healing of the brain that you mentioned
yes.
at the start. This with the Alzheimer's or dementia, is that avoiding like that issue that from my understanding is that plaque buildup and that's what causes it in the brain. And then now it's the neurogenesis creating the new pathways and allowing that to gain function again.
So this is how I think about plaque, and I'm going to use I'm going to use an IT one because you and I.
Yeah.
So imagine you have erroneous code. So I grew up in the object-oriented
Yep.
era, right? I think we all did. Um, but if you had an object-oriented, so you had one particular object that was poorly performing. The output for that particular object always incorrect, right? And it just so happened that there was some code inserted into it that always stuffed up the results. That's the plaque.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of the plaque, so the plaque is as much a result of bad coding as well as it then causing other
Other
things to
problems.
fail. Exactly.
Okay.
So what they're finding is that, yes, you can remove the plaque. That will help. But actually part of it is to go back to almost first principles and actually
And
go, well, why
remove,
is the plaque there?
prevent it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So
Yeah. my grandmother had dementia, and it's a
Oh, I'm
terrible thing to
sorry.
see, and
It is.
it's something that I don't ever want to have. Like, that's a fear of mine, is like not being able to use your own brain. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and seeing, like, hearing that as a result, and knowing that something can happen about it, it's an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, we're so excited. And like, I cannot wait, because what we need to do is, of course, put it through the scientific rigor of clinical trials and etc. But we will
Mhm.
absolutely recruit, because I'm exactly with you at that. My grandmother had vascular dementia as well. You just
Yep.
lose them, and it's a terrible way to die, I think.
Yeah,
So
most of the time she
yeah,
was reverted to memories of a child, and she wouldn't recognize any of us, and it was just, yeah, terrible. She had, at one point, she broke her hip, but then she was
so
bedridden because she
was,
couldn't go
yeah.
through the therapy anymore and the physio to then, because she didn't understand what was going on. So it was a bad decline.
I'm really sorry about that. Yeah, look, hip fractures in women,
That's a long time ago.
there's so many things that we can champion, and I think that if we can actually champion a reversal in cognitive loss,
Yep,
um, I dare not say something like cognitive gain, but essentially like a reversal in which the symptoms of cognitive loss are essentially walked backwards. I think that would give us so much hope. So
yep.
yeah.
And before we dive into the AI and then
Mm.
neural networks of the brain, and then AI replicating neural networks, trying to fix neural networks, you mentioned at
And
the
digital
start.
twins, don't forget that one.
Yeah, true. You mentioned at the start that it's not sort of like crystal healing. From what I understand, there is some crystals that work in the fMRI machines. So it is a bit of crystal healing, and that's the basis of how they operate.
You got me there. Yeah. So for anyone that's interested in MRI and MRI technology, so usually it tracks glucose or it tracks hydrogen molecules in PET machines, I think. But essentially, they have to lock on to something that changes, whether or not it's an element or it's even a proton, or etc. And the idea is that there is a state that changes through activation. Now, that activation could be a task or activity.
Yep,
So read this, sing this, twitch, scratch your nose, that kind of thing. Um, or it could just be, the fact that they're doing the MRI and you're just lying there, etc. So
yep,
we use a mapping form of the MRI, but we most definitely have a machine that can handle the fMRI. We just need to make sure that we're doing things that are accurate and well researched and supported.
of
For the
course.
very fact that our area sounds like it's crystal
Yep,
therapies and it's cutting edge, even though it's 40 years old.
yep. Everyone's AI in business at the moment, they're just thinking about large language models and ChatGPT, which may help you write a medical paper potentially if you can prompt it well enough. But I don't think
Yep.
that's the AI that you're talking about in your space, because you're going to be doing more traditional machine learning, neural networks with data and predictive statistical analysis. So how do you
Yeah.
see
So,
that those neural networks trying to fix the brain's neural networks and prevent the damage from getting worse?
oh gosh, it's a huge question. So, I mean, I think machine learning is more accurate. So for those people that are more nuanced about, yeah, it's not AI, it's machine learning. I think we've all spoken to those guys. Um,
Yep.
it really is, though, because how could you possibly process data from all these different sources? So, like in our clinic alone, you're going to have pathology results, you're going to have DNA results. Then I'm also going to input a whole bunch of lifestyle factors, your diet, your exercise, your mood, your sleep, and then we're doing a whole bunch of psychometric assessments, plan them all into a machine learning algorithm and output what would be research backed, crunching all through all the different meta analyses and all the different papers, etc. How do you actually do that if you are not going to have something as well powered as a machine learning algorithm that's able to do that? Now, of course, we've got a helping hand because Google has made a number of different investments. MedPalm, for example, which is a medical large language model. So, I mean, the people that are out there right now saying, "Oh, it's never been cheaper than ever in order to start a billion-dollar company," they're absolutely right because there's just so many tools out there, right? And
Yep.
I think that's probably a really good point in order to bring DevReady into this conversation, which is like, don't do this by yourself. Like, what does Mr. Beast say? Like, consultants are gifts from God, right?
Hmm.
Because they've done it before. They save you time, etc. It's the same thing with us. We're going to go to our international partners and go, "You're pushing the envelope. What are you doing? What's your results?" And that's why it's so important for us to
Yeah.
be involved in these kind of global conferences, but also global research networks, so that we can bring things from overseas here into Australia under clinical trials and strict scientific and medical conditions in order to test them out safely. I had a mum call me up in Melbourne when we had the clinic there last year, and she goes, "Oh, I'm about to drop 40K in order to go across to one of the clinics in the US." Now, I know the doctor running that. I'm part of a network run by Peter Diamandis, and I highly respect that particular doctor. But if $40,000 and you're completely overseas with a child by yourself, I think the research has shown that outpatient treatment where you're integrated back into the home environment works so much better, because you're not just having this kind of cut change kind of thing. Oh, you made so much improvement in the hospital, and then they boot you back out into reality. Or
Yeah.
you made so much improvement and you're in the US, but there's a whole life for you
And
back
then
in
go
Melbourne
and
or in
travel
Sydney.
25 hours and
Exactly. And then see what
yeah.
that does for your mental health, exactly, with a kid as well. Exactly. Right. So I think all parents empathize. We really want the best. And so some of the really exciting stuff that I saw with TMS, TPS was in autism. And it, forever I've always said autism is the third rail in psychiatry and neurology, because it's multifactorial in its cause. It seems to be multifactorial in its care. How can we
And in the
possibly treat some
behaviors
and the
as well.
behaviors?
They call it a spectrum because I guess they
It's a
can't actually
spectrum.
classify it enough where if you're at one end compared to the other, you may be classified as autism, but completely different features. So
That's right.
is that then two different things as well?
Yeah, exactly. Do we have basically like we grab the snake in the middle of the body and we don't have its head or its tail kind of thing? And I think that's problematic when you start going, oh, we're going to try to solve that, and it's like, can we just make some clinical improvement? How about let's try for clinical improvement? And no, we're seeing a lot of allied health being dedicated towards that. There's definitely improvement there. Great. Okay, so that forms a basis that there's neuroplasticity. How else do we activate and encourage environments of neuroplasticity? Could we do lifestyle modification? Could we do neurostimulation? And I think that perhaps is a more helpful structure for parents to navigate what are fairly murky waters. And difficult to understand technologies coming into that space.
Okay. So in the space you're in at that bleeding edge or just behind, and you've got the other partners that are pushing the envelope wherever
Yeah,
you may be. So you may be at a bit of both in different parts of the business. Are you seeing that with AI? A lot of the challenge is now trying to have the data sets prepared so you can use them in those models and have them trained and prepared. Because that's what we've seen. A lot smaller businesses just trying to do things. All right, you want to write content, ChatGPT is great. It can do some automations, but if you really want to do something custom that's going to be your competitive advantage, you need to have a large data set that you can train on that's been groomed to be accurate as well.
absolutely. And I was listening to the All In podcast and they were talking about regulatory capture. And I think that this is the biggest challenge, that you have huge data sets that have been very well protected, even with the regulatory change and the need in order to have interconnectivity. They still sit largely outside of those particular silos that one would actually say is digitized. So that's patient notes, voice conversations, etc., kind of thing, not recorded, not documented, a whole bunch of
Yeah.
data outside, sit in silos, take forever in order to build what would essentially be a genuinely usable data lake. And then you have, I guess, the model that I like to think about in terms of AI is that you have essentially a large language model that is trained for medicine. You have a unique repository that is unique to your own custom capture. I think that would work really well from a proprietary point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the ability to interrogate across it, right? So
Yeah.
input the data from the different sources and across it. I think that to me is a design that might actually work really well at scale. But that's not currently the situation that we've
No,
got.
I think that ties into you would need every interaction completely recorded. So every input face-to-face interaction will need to be recorded. So you can capture the
Mm,
nuance in what you're saying, the questions that you're asking, which may not be present in those data sets,
yep.
but to ask, or you can tease out the information that a standard question isn't answered by person A, but person B would answer it. So
Hmm.
there's always going to be those little nuances, especially in this space where it's everybody's a unique system, a thousand
Hmm.
different factors in the environment that affect it, and you need to understand, try and uncover the fog of what's actually happening.
I think you're onto something, because I was just listening to Peter Diamandis interview someone, and he said, look, the wearable that we're actually interested in is not related to like physical touch on a body, etc., kind of thing. We're actually interested in voice. And there's an AI solution that we're working on with a gateway device, and we will be focusing on the power of voice. Past examples of mental health clinical trials that have gone wrong has been very much focused on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
You're depressed, you're tired, you're anxious. You don't have the system or the rhythm that you and I might have to actually plug your phone in or your wearable in, so it runs out of battery. Your data collection incorrect,
Fails. Yep.
fails, etc., kind of thing. So things like that, you start thinking about, okay, well, what's the reliability of capture? So not so much of compliance, but what do you like to adhere to? And can we essentially, as a third party, monitor you? Not in a third state kind of way, but essentially you are allowing us in order to help you. And the observation that is possible from a device, from a wearable, needs to be thought again. I think voice is actually a really powerful medium to do
Yeah.
that.
And we're getting to that better battery technology, which all of that relies on over time, which will allow that longer life, better capture. So that someone may go into a trial and have a 30-day cycle or a repeat effectively to change a device like they would change their medicine.
Yes.
It's just going to take time to
Yes.
get there.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I love
And
that. I love that you're thinking of that. Yep.
just before we wrap up, I've just got something that I've seen on a couple of podcasts and read about, which is the AI research model for the medical space that's come out of Google recently. I don't know if you've heard about it. I think it's the last couple of weeks. So it was able to do research on a specific topic, and I think it was in 2 hours or 2 days. It took, I can't remember exactly how long it was, where people have been working in the field and it took them 2 or 3 years to solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can now design proteins for a particular purpose. So you want a protein that will lift oil and dirt and then biodegrade inside the sea and not kill sea turtles, etc. You can design that. Similarly, you can crunch data in a far more effective way than ever before, right?
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with all AI regulation at the moment, we just saw this recently with APRA, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulatory Authorities, changes to the AI legislation. They published it in August
Mm-hmm.
last year. And shout out to my cousin, Ken, who's a professor now at University of Washington in AI for bringing me up to speed about them. The crux of all of it is, guess what? If you use AI, you might use Heidi, you might use a whole bunch of different, recording devices and all that kind of stuff. In the end, the practitioner is still responsible for it. Because, of course, in this highly medico-legal, highly
Mm-hmm.
litigious environment, somebody has to be able to be responsible, if not sued, right?
Yep.
If something goes wrong. And it's definitely not going to be the AI companies at
Yep.
this point. So what is that? What am I trying to say? Is that it's so wonderful that Google has published this out. I've seen the Notebook LM stuff that they've been doing. They've been doing some really cool stuff in terms of their ability. I think Gemini is probably one of the most powered AI engines out there at the moment. The problem is that a human has to still stand behind it. Now,
Yep.
Eric Topol just recently did a New York Times op-ed piece, and he showed that AI is actually outperforming even doctors with AI optimization. So if
Yep.
you've got an AI in your pocket and you're helping with the kind of thing, in fact, the addition of the doctors, these us meat sacks, was not actually useful to the AI. So
Yep. Yeah,
what
there's
are the
tests where it's
implications
like
there?
85% compared to 94% accuracy in reading MRI and X-ray scans, and then certain
100%.
diagnoses.
That's right. So what does that mean for all our radiology colleagues who were, if you were trained in the old traditional kind of model, and almost all skill set, as Naval would actually say, is essentially kind of like you being mentored and apprenticed all the way through your career, right? So you start on the chest X-rays, and you start on the, CTs and all kinds. None of that is going to be relevant to the new radiology graduates now. How do we train them? Right.
Yep.
So similarly, if in IT, when you and I both started, if we decided to be developers, we cut code, hello world, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
But now coding is essentially orchestration, right?
Yeah.
I'm
And
going to
you're a
grab a piece of
supervisor.
hello world. That's right. Exactly. You're a supervisor. You never cut code. You can't dive into each thing that's going on. Your object orientation, as an
Yep.
example, something's going wrong in that particular chunk of code. You're not able, in order to actually dive through it unless, of course, they're like you, Anthony, where they used to cut code from
Yeah.
scratch, right? So it becomes problematic in the way that we think about all apprenticeship-based models, and that includes also research. First you analyze the table, then eventually you're going to do maybe a literature review, then you get trusted with a meta-analysis, maybe you get trusted with your own clinical trial. Problem there is, at what point in time do you essentially go, you know what, it's just easier to hand it off to Google. But if I'm
Yeah.
responsible for it, how do I assess the fact that that is actually true, that is actually
Yeah.
accurate?
And then your
So
concern as the medical practitioner is that's a black box. It's telling me
totally,
this, and
exactly.
I will
Yeah,
now
and
take that into a consideration and make my own assumption based on it. So that's where
exactly.
they reduce the accuracy.
That's exactly right. And then you go, okay, well, you know what? If I'm not going to be able to trust your results and I'm responsible for it and I lose my license if
Yeah.
I'm going to trust you, I'm just going to do it myself. And you know that that's human nature. We see that with all the small business owners who are like, you
Mm-hmm.
know what? I could outsource my bookkeeping, but I may as well stay up to 2 a.m. and do it myself if it means that I get my BAS right and I'm going to
Yeah.
save $60 an hour, right? And you're like, don't do that. But
So on that point, then, do you see that those enhancements or breakthroughs will come out of probably the non-westernized countries where it's not as litigious and not as much onus put onto the doctors? Because then they won't have that barrier and they may be able to make those breakthroughs easier because they can just, here's the AI telling me this, let's move forward with it potentially.
it's a good observation. I mean, look, brand
Um,
Australia, in the medical sense especially, it's got such a high value because our TGA is just so good at protecting us and making sure everything's to standard. You know,
yeah,
full credit to these guys for what they do on the budget that they do it on. The challenge is that where do you then push the envelope? Maybe it is in less regulated environments, or maybe it's in areas where they go, you know what, we don't know everything about this
hmm
particular body that is the human brain or the human body itself. So we should be able to enable and allow safe research out there,
yep,
people who are willing in order to try something different or new. And I think that that's the reason why you're going to find the innovation is in those conditions where we're just throwing our hands up and we're like, don't know, you know, we're not even sure we've got
give
the
it a
right
go.
diagnosis. Yeah, exactly. It's a spectrum, you know, and sometimes they fit this mold and sometimes they fit that mold. And if you look at how much the DSM, the diagnosis manual
Yep,
for psychiatrists, has essentially changed from DSM-4 to DSM-6. It's the nuances, it's the questions. You take a right turn here, you take a left turn there, etc. Kind of thing. It becomes incredibly complex. So I think that as much as AI outperforms doctors with AI, humans
yep,
still want a connection with a doctor. They
of
still
course.
want someone to trust. And so those particular countries that are pushing the envelope, I still believe that it's not because they're doing it in a mercenary, taking advantage of
Yep,
people that, and I hope not anyway, we would still need to replicate those protocols here in Australia to
hmm
TGA standards, to clinical trial standards, you know, good clinical guidelines standards, that we would essentially still be very protective of our patients. And we are. I mean, and that's
yep.
the reason why we
And
presented in
having those
Thailand. So
guardrails and regulations can probably help you propel further as well,
that's
because now
right,
you've got a set
exactly.
of things that you can't do. So you have to work
Yes.
harder to get around them and improve things rather than try the wrong thing in a different area because there's no guardrail saying don't go there effectively.
Exactly, and that's right. And so what is it? The only laws that cannot be violated are physics, right? So, yeah, like I was offered alkaline water, and I always laugh because I think, but you know, like just simple laws of physics and chemistry, etc., kind of thing, and the ability in order to acidify alkalized water in an instant and
It
with your
doesn't
parietal
make
cells
sense. And then there's like, yeah,
doesn't make
hydrogen water. The
sense,
water's
right?
already got hydrogen in it.
Yeah, exactly.
What's it
Things
made
like
of?
that, you know, and you just go, if you knew it from first principles, then maybe. And so I think that that's what's so useful that, you know, when you present research that you go, hey guys, we're getting better than global averages results here in Melbourne or in Australia. They go, well, come and talk to us about it. Do you think it's this? Do you think it's your lifestyle modification program? Do you think it's the neuronavigation? And they also use neuronavigation. What do you think it actually is? And that conversation then basically sprouts a whole bunch of different mushrooms that go, oh my God, we can do a clinical trial on this and we can go investigate that. And just requires curiosity. So,
Yep.
you know, I want to stress to you, you know, complying with Australian standards is no joke. It's the reason why the data that's generated here can actually be used by the FDA for pharmaceutical and biotech
Because
companies
such
in
high
order to
quality.
apply. It's such high quality. So honestly, if companies like mine, physicians like me, bringing that technology from overseas here, then I really hope that, if this is something that you're curious about, at least just ask. Really happy to answer questions, because then at least you have more information, and then it just sprouts that whole bunch of thinking of like, I wonder whether or not this might work or that could work, because it is very much personalized. You have to make it specific to that each individual patient.
Everyone's, like I said before, everyone's body is a different system that's unique and specific to
Absolutely.
them. So, if anyone wants to find out more about any of this and get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Oh, visit our website, brainaidclinics.com. So that's with an S on the end, or info@brainaidclinics.com. Happy to have a chat, or send through emails. We have an entire research dossier that we usually reserve for our physicians, because, like, it's pretty boring, but it is really comprehensive across Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and a whole bunch of other conditions that RTMS, which is on label for depression. So it is available on the MBS for treatment-resistant depression, but we are investigating it for other conditions. And part of that, I think, is our responsibility is to amass the data out there, that would support why we would believe in it. So we're happy to share that with you.
Awesome. Well, it's been an amazing chat. I'm sure we could have had a few hours
Yeah,
long
really enjoyed
podcast and
it.
probably do a couple other episodes. It's amazing to see the breakthroughs that are happening and how you're able to help people. And it'd be awesome just to keep in touch and just see where you're going with all of this, because you are at the cutting edge of all that sort of research and
We need
AI and technology.
Yeah, we need all the help that we can get, especially with you and your AI and your tech background. The fact that you really understand it already, absolutely, I'd love to keep in touch.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Grace. Have a
Thanks,
great day.
Anthony. Cheers.